Okay, so when you're ready, settling back down onto your seats. Sorry, I just cancelled the spotlight video. Josh, hope that's all right. I hope that didn't cancel it to everyone else. I just didn't want to see me the whole time. I'll just get a gallery. There we go. Okay. So I had a funny little experience with that meditation. I was trying to work out what was weird. Something was weird with my breath. What was going on? It just had a really different quality. And I realized it's because I have these earbuds in, and it was the sound of my breath is so incredibly much louder. It's quite strange. But if you ever want to meditate on the sound of your breath, it's a good method. Just get some earplugs. Okay, and I'm hoping you can't hear the beeps that keep dinging on my computer. Apologies if you can. So this evening, the talk is, the theme or the title is Not Self, Anatta, and Simplicity. So this theme, this Buddhist teaching, Anatta, is a very big and potentially complicated teaching, but it's a very large topic. So I feel like it's a fairly ambitious topic for a short talk on an evening on Zoom. But I'm just going to briefly introduce the concept or the topic, and then focus in on one particular aspect, which is the simplicity aspect. So I'm not pretending to do justice to the entire topic of not self. But I thought I may even do a series. I might do the next couple of talks on this, continuing this theme. So you may well be familiar with this. One of the Buddha's key teachings is this idea, this concept of the self is an illusion. So the self being, our name, our identity, this body, everything that's related to or that we perceive as being ourself. This is, in essence, all an illusion. But our understanding, the way that we operate every day, of course, is highly dependent on this sort of convention of, my name, I'm Suzie, and you're Hartmut, and you're Tammy, and so on. We have these identities, of course, as a way to operate in this world. It's like a social convention, and that's a plant, and this is a chair, and that's a table. Of course, we need all these concepts to function, to make sense of things and to interrelate. But in reality, everything is constantly changing. Everything is impermanent. There's no real fixed reality or truth at a deeper level. And the Buddha taught that taking this understanding of the world, these identities and these ideas, taking them too seriously and clinging to them will just lead to suffering. So, in fact, if you think about it, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, our concept of self, and more in our modern society, there's an obsession with the self. And this obsession with our identity and our sense of self is the primary source of suffering. And letting go of this will lead us to the ultimate happiness and freedom. So that's the promise that the Buddha taught. So the suffering associated, I think looking at the suffering associated with our humans' obsession with the self is really evident, and we can just see how strong this clinging is to our identity. When we reflect on the roots of our own or of other people's suffering, so much of it has to do with this clinging to this sense of self, or this our identity. So, for example, think about conflict. So perhaps even bring to mind for yourself the last time you had a conflict with another person, you know, a close family member, a friend, a work colleague, someone in the street. This conflict often, or pretty much always, arises because I'm clinging to my sense of self and the other person's clinging to their sense of self. I'm right and they're wrong. We build up this sense of our identity as being a person who is right, who knows what they're talking about, who is well informed, or, you know, knowledgeable, etc. And when that is threatened by another self, this creates conflict. Another concept we have of ourself, our identity, is that I'm a good person. It's very, I mean, it really is important to me to feel like I'm a good person. And if you say I've been, you know, not a good person, I've been not nice in some way, or I've stuffed up, you know, this really hurts. It threatens our sense of self, the whole identity I've built up for myself, which is that I'm a good person. One example that sprung to mind is kind of slightly ridiculous, but I'll tell you the story anyway. Where I felt this sort of real threat to my identity, the sense of self that I'd built up. On one occasion, a number of years ago, we rented a Airbnb apartment in England, and my husband and I and my daughter stayed there. And after, while we'd been there for a few days, my husband had brought my daughter some terrible craft kit with glitter in it, which I just hate, but he bought it as, you know, we're on holidays, a special treat. So she did all this glitter craft, and there's just glitter everywhere. And when we left this apartment, we had to pack everything and go, and there was no vacuum cleaner. And we kind of left the place, you know, we tried to clean, but it really wasn't super clean. But hey, they have cleaners coming. But nevertheless, the owner of that apartment gave me a very bad review on Airbnb. And this, you know, as you would know, Airbnb reviews are public. So people will now see on my you know, profile of Airbnb that I would not recommend Suzie to rent your apartment. You know, they did this, that, and the other. They didn't leave it clean. So I remember feeling so devastated that this sort of public rebuke of myself, my sense of self, had occurred, and it was there on Airbnb forever. So look, there are so many of these examples. I'm sure you can think of some for yourself, where we just, you know, it hurts or it's embarrassing to have these, our sense of self be knocked down. And making a mistake, which we all do, making mistakes are often very painful for us because of this, this desire to be the person that gets it right, to be the person who, you know, is successful and looked up to, and so on. So mistakes are very difficult for our sense of self. So yes, conflict I've talked about, feeling hurt when, you know, we make a mistake. But another massive area where you can see this sense of self and the kind of the suffering that can create this identity is in relation to material possessions and greed and competition. So, you know, this is really underpins the whole of sort of capitalism and the way our society operates. That we want, many people, not everybody, but most people want to feel like they're getting ahead, that they're, you know, better than other people, that they're succeeding, they're climbing the ladder of their career, or, you know, they're famous. So many people would love to be famous just to feel better than others, to feel like my identity, my self is somehow better than lots of other people. You know, I mean, there's 7 billion people on this planet. It's kind of ridiculous in a way when you think about it, but this is what so many people do. So it drives us to many people, it drives them to want to accrue more and more things, to, you know, have a greater status, a bigger house, more cars, etc., all of that. So it's a massive, this clinging to this particular sense of self to be better than others is a huge driver of so much, so many problems. And, you know, I'm sure you can think of examples, and, you know, there are so many celebrities, famous people who report that when they finally get what those accolades that they'd hoped to get, they win some, you know, Academy Award or whatever, or they make the millions of dollars they were striving for, they've made it, right? But they still don't feel happy or feel satisfied. It's such a common story, because actually inherently they've built up this false sense of self, or it's just foundationless. And so they reach this kind of idea of perfection of what they're trying to achieve, and surprise, surprise, it's not that, there's not that much happiness to be found there. It's not a real happiness. And then one other sense of self or identity that I wanted to mention is really relevant to what's been going on in recent weeks with all the protests around Black Lives Matter, and the re-emerging of this incredible racism that goes on in, you know, many, particularly in Western developed countries. So Australia and our shocking history with First Nations people, also, you know, many countries have these same patterns going on. And again, it's this false sense of identity or self that people have built up. So a group of people, happens to be white people, have this conception, I'm white and they are not. The other, you know, those who are black are different and inferior. And it makes this, the group of white people feel more secure and powerful and, you know, less fearful if they can overpower the other race of people. And their, you know, racism is born. So there's a real sense of, again, being better than others and being stronger and more powerful than another group of people. And it's all built on this false identity, this false difference between us, like one group of people and another. So, and now, you know, it's all pervasive, this sort of racism through our society. So no surprise that just cannot go on, and there's now incredible protests and hopefully change happening. Okay, so they've given you a bit of an outline of some of the suffering that arises from a clinging to this identity or sense of self. And I'm sure if you know, like I said, if you reflect on some of the more recent stress points or conflict that you've experienced in your own life, if you dig a little deeper in there, you'll probably find that your own clinging to your identity is at the root of it, and potentially the other person, well, certainly the other person's as well. Okay, so one quote that I really like arising out of that, you know, reflection is that there was one Sri Lankan monk who said with a big smile, "No self, no problem." So in a simple sense, he could see that this self, this clinging is the root of all of our problems, really. And the more we can let go of it, the happier we can be. Okay, and I just want to mention one thing before I get into the solution side of things, is that we do need this concept or conception of self, you know, that I'm Susie and you're Jane and you're Jessica. We need to operate, you know, with these conventions, as I mentioned. And a healthy sense of self in a kind of everyday psychological sense is very important as a way to function in this society in this everyday way. So there, Thanissaro Bhikkhu expressed it very nicely, that we need strategies of self and strategies of not self in order to be happy. So there's a lot to unpack there, and that might be another talk next time around strategies of self and of not self. But essentially we need to be wise with how we work with ourselves in this everyday relating to other people day in, day out, but not cling deeply to that sense of self, which is then the strategies of not self. So letting go, being, holding lightly to that sense of self, that identity. So, you know, that identity of being Silvana, or of being a teacher or a doctor, or being a parent or a brother or sister, or whatever it may be. So if we can hold that much more lightly, we can live in a much more expansive and more generous way. And I did want to mention that if any of you want to unpack this idea a lot more deeply around the not self, I really recommend this amazing book. I'll just show you, called Emptiness, which is by Guy Armstrong, who is a teacher in California, who teaches at Spirit Rock. And emptiness, essentially most of the book is talking about not self. And his conception of emptiness as being the self is essentially empty. So you can really go deep with that if that sparks your interest. Okay, so not self. When and how do we experience it? So, as you all are probably well aware, in Buddhist practice, it's all about experience. So whatever I say today, you know, it's not about believing whether this is true or not what I'm saying. Until you experience that is when you know it for yourself in your body. You experience something. So that's what I want to talk about, is how we might experience not self. This dropping away of our identity, this being much more lighter and expansive with our identity that I mentioned. So, of course, meditation and mindfulness is a huge opportunity for this. So when we are really in the moment, really present, and, you know, the thoughts drop away and we're very much here and now, all that self-making is subsiding. So that's a huge opportunity for the self-making, the selfing to subside. So the less thinking we're doing, the less clinging to things, the less planning and so on, those constructions of our identity drop away. So you may, if any of you have been on longer retreats, you may have had that experience over the course of a retreat, that often all the things that, you know, generally we consider to make up our self and identity gradually drop away, and there's a greater openness and connection between others, between ourselves and other people, between ourselves and the nature, the land that we're on. And of course, on retreat, you know, we take away a lot of our identity just simply by going away on retreat and, you know, sleeping in a simple room and eating, you know, simple food and having this very simple routine. All those things like our job and our family and our car and our clothes and all that, most of that stuff is gone. So yeah, there's another opportunity there to let those constructions drop away. And it's such a relief when we do that, because so much of our lives is spent, you know, propelling ourselves along with a this sort of energy about wanting to make ourselves better and bigger and stronger, you know, whether it's to achieve in our career or to, you know, find the perfect partner or whatever it may be. So it's such a relief when we stop doing that, even if it's only for a week. So another couple of opportunities are also meditating or just being in nature. So again, on retreat is always a great opportunity to just deeply connect with the landscape, the animals, the plants around us. And often the experience there is a real a sense of feeling very connected, and my separateness drops away, you know, when I'm deeply meditating in nature. That's the experience that I have. And this can be even just walking on the beach or walking in the forest. Many people report that sort of experience. So I highly recommend that as another opportunity to let the self drop away. And then the final opportunity I wanted to talk about is simplicity, as I mentioned. So this COVID lockdown situation really inspired me, or, you know, reminded me of this, because I was thinking how so many people I know have reported that whilst this being isolated at home and you know, restricted is challenging in many ways, there's also been a lot of upsides. And the upsides, many people report, are this simplicity where life has become less complicated. They're no longer rushing around to a million things, and they're just taking it slowly, and you know, life's become less complicated. And isn't that awesome? So many people have reported, particularly those with kids who normally, you know, rush around to 20 activities a week, and all of a sudden they could just sit at home and hang out with their kids. So this simplicity, simplifying our lives, is a way that we can drop a lot of that selfing. So other ways, so, you know, you don't need a COVID lockdown to simplify your life. So other ways to do it is to have less material possessions. So buy less stuff, have less clutter hanging around. And likewise, less striving to earn more money, less kind of, you know, need to have a lot of money to finance a particular lifestyle. So when we simplify our lives, all of a sudden we don't need to earn as much money to finance it. Therefore, life can slow down a bit and we don't feel the pressure. One example that I love is fashion. So people who really care about fashion have this sense, and that is part of their identity. I'm a fashionable person. Will be propelled to go out and buy new clothes all the time and always look up to the minute and wearing the latest fashion. So imagine if you just drop that. If you just, I'm not going to worry about looking fashionable, how much that would simplify your life. Amazing. You don't have to spend all that money. You don't have to go to the shops all the time. You don't have to maintain all these clothes and so on. So I wanted to finish with a quote from the Buddha, of course. So the Buddha lived the most simple lifestyle, of course, you know, as you can imagine, being a wandering mendicant is probably the most simple possible way of living. So back in the Buddha's time, but in fact even now there are still in India wandering monks who all they have is a robe and a bowl, and they go around and people, you know, feed them, put food in their bowl, and they live, meditate and sleep in the forest often, or, you know, in a simple hut or a cave or something. So that's the ultimate of simplicity. And I'm not suggesting that you all rush off and do that necessarily. But the Buddha, when he had become a teacher and he taught for many decades, taught many people his teachings, the path to enlightenment. And at one point someone asked him, that, Buddha, why don't you go and live in a palace? You know, now you've got the support of kings and wealthy nobles, and you could have anything you want. They would happily, you know, put you up in a palace. And he said, I'd prefer to live in the forest. He said, I see a pleasant abiding for myself here and now, and I have compassion for future generations. So I'll just say that again. The Buddha said, I see a pleasant abiding for myself here and now, and I have compassion for future generations. And so what this means, what he meant, I think, interpreting what he meant was that he had a pleasant abiding living in the forest. That's all he needed. He didn't have a clinging or, you know, a desire for material comfort. But also by setting an example as the renunciate in the forest, living in that simple way, he could inspire others to live in that way and have the best possible conditions for awakening. So that's the compassion for future generations. He wanted more people to live simply like him and have the conditions for awakening. So he saw that this simple living, that letting everything of your identity and clinging to any particular possessions as the way, the path to awakening. So, you know, that's an extreme example. As I said, we don't all need to go out and live in the forest in a robe with a bowl. It is possible to do that. You know, you can take robes still these days, and that's more or less how those nuns and monks are living. But even in as lay people, we can still, you know, simplify. We can let things drop. All those things that I've talked about tonight, that we, you know, everyone is different, but notice what it is that you cling to most, and see where there's opportunity to simplify or to drop things. And finally, this ability or this path of being able to let go, to drop those things we cling to that build up our sense of identity and self. There's an opportunity to drop that and drop them until we can really let go and feel a freedom, also leads to a rise in huge compassion for others. So the less tight and clinging we are to our own sense of self, the more we're able to open up to others, to other people, to nature, animals, plants, the whole world. So I think this is the path to solving a lot of the conflict and suffering in our world, you know, racism being one really current, powerful example. So thank you everyone for listening. I really appreciate you being here, and yeah, much gratitude to you all. May you all go well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzie. I'm just wondering whether you would like us to